some really great questions in my DMs that I wanted to bring on here and share with everybody. So we've been talking a lot about glute clenching, and if you imagine that this is the socket of my hip, and this is my femur, my thigh bone, the neck of my femur, the ball that fits into the socket. Okay, so here's the ball and the socket. And if you're clenching, you're creating tension in the back of your hip that pushes the ball forward in the socket because there isn't enough activity from the front and there's too much activity from the back. So the ball sits more forward in the socket and it changes the mechanics of how the hip moves. It's able to move backwards better, but it's not able to roll forwards very well. And so instead of the hip function being the loads on the hip being distributed all throughout that socket, you get more load there in the front where the ball is stuck because it can't move backwards as well. So someone was asking me if this whole scenario where you've got too much going on in the back and not enough in the front, we want to rebalance that by working more in the front, relaxing more in the back, if this is made worse by osteoarthritis. And I would say that actually osteoarthritis is caused in part by this scenario. There's never one factor, and obviously there's genetics and lifestyle that we have to consider, but this is one of the lifestyle considerations. If you're predominantly using the muscles in the back of your hip and the ball of your hip cannot move all over the socket, then you are going to create more wear where that ball sits instead of the loads being evenly distributed. And that is why we get one of the reasons why we get arthritis is because that load isn't evenly distributed. And this is why when you have osteoarthritis, some of the best things you can do for that joint are to create as much mobility as you can so that you're not stuck creating wear in only one place, but that the load can be distributed throughout the joint, and also to be as strong as you can so that your muscles can help absorb the load and the impact instead of it only going through the bones. So strength and mobility are two of the best things that we can do in a case of arthritis. And when you are a clencher, you're not going to have great strength and mobility, and so that's a reason to work at reversing that, because if you don't have arthritis, you can prevent it from occurring or slow the rate at which it happens in your life, because we're all going to get it eventually. Or if you have arthritis, you can slow the progression and decrease the effect that it has on your life. All right, the other question that I had was about the study that I shared about hip internal rotation and low back pain. And so the study was actually a literature review of 12 different articles, and their hypothesis was that they thought that if people had limitations in hip rotation, that they would compensate by excessive spinal rotation, and that would lead to low back pain. And so they were looking at these 12 different articles to see who had back pain and who didn't, and what kind of hip motion that they had. And so the question I got from y'all was, could you give a visual demonstration of what you're describing here instead of just writing it out in words? So of course, if this is my hip socket and this is the ball in the socket, internal rotation is rolling the femur inward in the socket, which takes my foot out away from midline, and external rotation is going outward. Okay, and then the combined rotation would be the internal rotation plus the external rotation, which would give you the total rotation in the hip. And so what this study found was that internal rotation was either limited, meaning they couldn't go very far, or it didn't match the other side in people who had back pain. But the same thing wasn't true in people who didn't have back pain. And they also found that the total rotation, internal plus external, was either limited, it wasn't as much, or it didn't match the other side in people with low back pain, but that wasn't true in people who didn't have back pain. But they did not find the same thing to be true with external rotation and back pain. The limitations and the asymmetries did not necessarily correlate.